The ship had no business being there. That was the first thing Sector Admiral Oreth of the Veth Compact thought when the contact alarm pulled him out of his sleep cycle at 3 in the station morning. He stood at the sensor console in his quarters and stared at the readout. His third eye, the one that opened only when his threat-processing brain was active, opened slowly and stayed open. A vessel, drifting. No engine output, no beacon, no transponder signal, moving through the null corridor at a speed that only made sense if something had given it a push a very long time ago and it had been coasting ever since. Oreth pulled on his command jacket and went to the bridge without calling for an escort. He was the kind of officer who liked to look at problems before he let other people look at them. 41 years in the compact fleet had taught him that problems looked different when everyone was watching. They became performances. He preferred them raw. The bridge was half-staffed at this hour. Night watch. Junior officers who straightened up very fast when they saw him walk through the door. He ignored the straightening. He went to the primary sensor station and looked over the shoulder of the officer seated there. A young Veth female named Sub-Lieutenant Pressa, who smelled like she had also just been woken up. "Tell me," he said. "Unknown vessel, sir. No transponder, no active systems we can detect. Hull configuration is," she pulled up the profile comparison, human. "Confirmed human design, a warship class, old." "How old?" She hesitated. The hull profile matches the ESV Carthage class. That class was decommissioned. She checked her data, 41 years ago, sir. Oreth looked at the screen. "Is it possible it's a newer ship built on an older design?" "Yes, sir, but the hull damage is consistent with the age. This ship has been in space for a very long time. The wear patterns on the plating," she zoomed in on the sensor image, "you don't fake that kind of weathering." Oreth clasped his hands behind his back and studied the image. The ship was enormous, even damaged. Human warships always were. That was the thing about humans that the Compact never quite got comfortable with. They built for endurance. Compact ships were elegant, precise, efficient. Human ships looked like something that had been beaten against a rock until it stopped breaking. This one looked like it had been beaten against several rocks. The forward section was scorched black, not by weapons fire, by something else, something that had left a pattern Oreth didn't recognize. The starboard engine pods were dark and cold. One of the sensor arrays was sheared clean off, and the stub of it caught the distant starlight at an angle that made it look like a broken tooth. But the hull was intact. All things considered, the hull was remarkably intact. "Hailing frequencies," he said. "Open since the alarm triggered, sir. No response on any frequency. Human standard, compact standard, emergency bands. Nothing." "Life signs." Pressa ran the scan again. She ran it twice. "Marginal, sir. Life support is at 4% capacity. Heat signatures consistent with minimal biological activity." She paused. "Could be automated systems running warm. Could be a handful of survivors in a sealed compartment. The ship is too heavily shielded to get a precise count." "A handful." "At most, sir. If anyone is alive in there, they are not in good condition." Oreth straightened. "Name of the ship." Pressa had already looked. She turned to face him, and he noticed her expression, the particular flatness that junior officers wore when they were delivering information they thought might upset someone. "Hull markings are still legible on the port quarter, sir. ESV Carthage. Registry number 774 Alpha Meridian." She paused. "That registry number matches the vessel that was reported lost in this region of space 39 years ago." The bridge went quiet, not the usual soft station quiet of a night watch, a different kind. Oreth said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about protocol. The protocol for a vessel found in the null corridor was extremely clear. It had been drafted specifically because the Compact had always known, that someday something would come drifting out of that stretch of space, and no one wanted to make decisions under pressure without a script to follow. Impound the vessel. Arrest any crew. Notify the Security Council within 4 hours. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to investigate the interior of any vessel found in the corridor without a full hazard team and direct authorization from the Council. Get me a boarding team, he said. Full hazard rating. Suits sealed, no external contamination, weapons on standby but holstered. I want them on that ship within the hour. Sir, Pressa hesitated. The protocol authorizes a boarding, he said. I've read it, you've presumably read it, send the team. She sent the team. Oreth watched the boarding footage on the bridge's secondary monitor. He did not go himself. This was one of the cases where he felt it was important to let other people look at the problem first, and he sat in his command chair and drank something hot from a cup and watched. The hazard team moved through the Carthage like they were walking through deep water, slowly, carefully. Their helmet lights swept corridors that were half dark and entirely wrong, not because anything was visibly out of place, but because of what was not visible. The ship was clean. Too clean for a vessel that had been drifting for what might be 39 years. The corridors were clear. The equipment lockers were closed and latched. In the mess hall, the team leader found tables set not for a meal, but as if someone had recently cleared and wiped them, stacked the chairs, tidied the space. There were personal effects everywhere. A photograph pinned to a bunk wall. A jacket hung on a hook outside a cabin door. A child's drawing, a crayon rendering of a spaceship against a green sky, taped to the inside of a storage cabinet that a crew member must have opened 1,000 times. There were no crew members. 340 people had shipped on the Carthage when it was last catalogued. Oreth had the manifest pulled while the team moved through the ship. 340 names. Humans, all of them. The Carthage had been an Earth fleet vessel, not a mixed-crew compact ship. 340 names, and of them not one body, not one bloodstain, not one sign of violence or accident or evacuation. No escape pods launched. The pods were all still in their bays, sealed. The team leader reported from the bridge of the Carthage. His voice was very steady, the particular steadiness of someone who had decided that steady was the only acceptable option. The logs are intact up to a certain point, he said. Then they cut off. Last entry, a pause, appears to be from ship day 312 of the voyage. Read it, Oreth said. The team leader read from the screen. Audio log, personal crew member designation, Chief Engineer M. Halloway. Quote, day 312, they're on the other side of the door again. Jenkins says we should open it. I told Jenkins we don't open doors we didn't close, told him we didn't close this one. He said that wasn't the point. I told him it was exactly the point. He argued I didn't. End log. Another pause, that's all. After that, nothing. What door? Oreth said. I don't know, sir. There are a lot of doors. Find the one that doesn't open. The team spent 40 minutes looking. The Carthage was a large ship, one of the largest human warships of its generation, built to carry assault personnel and serve as a mobile command platform. It had 17 decks and enough corridors that the hazard team split into 4 groups and moved in patterns. They found doors that were locked, doors that were sealed for standard maintenance reasons, doors that had been damaged and warped and would need tools to open. They found one door, a heavy internal blast door on Deck 9, deep in the ship's engineering section, that had been welded shut from the outside. Not sealed by automated systems. Manually welded. Someone had stood on the outside of that door with a welding torch and sealed it, and then apparently walked away and not come back. The team leader put a sensor against the door. He reported, atmosphere on the other side, stable temperature. No life signs detectable through the door material, but the shielding is heavy. Sir? Another pause, there's something on the door. What? Writing, scratched into the metal, recent scratching, the metal is bright, no oxidation. Someone scratched this recently. He positioned his helmet camera. It says, whoever you are, don't. Oreth told the team to come back to the ship. The Security Council convened 6 hours later. Oreth attended via holocom from his patrol vessel, which was now holding position at a safe distance from the Carthage. He had not slept. He had drunk a great deal of hot liquid and looked at sensor data and tried to decide what he thought. The council was not pleased. "The vessel should not have been boarded," said Counselor Vreth, who was in charge of null corridor protocols and took violations of them with the enthusiasm of a person who had written the protocols personally and considered them their greatest life achievement. "The protocol allows for preliminary boarding to establish the nature and threat level of the incursion," Oreth said. "I followed the protocol." "You followed the letter of it. That is what protocol is for." Vreth made a sound that conveyed displeasure without using words, which was something Veth could do when their throat sacs vibrated at a specific frequency. "What is the status of the vessel now?" "Drifting, no power, no response to hails, no visible crew." Oreth paused. "A crew of 340 missing, a ship that shouldn't exist, and a welded door with a warning scratched into it. And you want to know what Earth says about this?" "I think Earth should be asked. The vessel is theirs, the crew was theirs." The council talked about it. This was what councils did, they talked, and the talk moved in circles, and eventually the circles got small enough that a decision fell out of the middle. The decision was, Earth would be formally notified, formally demanded to explain, and given 48 hours to respond. The formal demand was a lengthy document. It referenced 17 separate articles of the Null Corridor Pact. It used the phrase grave violation 4 times and severe diplomatic consequences twice. Oreth read it and thought that if he had written it he would have made it shorter, but he had not written it. Earth's response arrived in 3 hours. Not 48 hours, 3. Oreth read it on a personal screen so that no one else would see his expression when he read it, because he was not entirely sure what expression he was making. It was 2 sentences. "We don't recognize that ship. We do not have a record of a vessel called Carthage." That was all. No apology, no diplomatic softening, no request for more information, no expression of concern for the alleged crew. 2 sentences, and they arrived 3 hours into a 48-hour window, which meant that whoever sent them had not spent much time agonizing over the wording. Oreth forwarded the response to the council, and then sat in thought for a while. There were 2 possibilities. Either Earth was lying with a speed and a flatness that suggested they had been waiting for this message, and had the response already prepared, or Earth was telling the truth, in which case a human warship that Earth had no record of had come from somewhere, and the somewhere was inside the Null Corridor, and that was a much larger problem than a diplomatic incident. He was still thinking about it when Pressa appeared in the doorway of his ready room. "Sir," she said, "the Carthage." "What about it?" "It's moving." He was up from his chair before she finished the sentence. On the bridge, the sensors were clear. The Carthage was no longer drifting on its original trajectory. It had altered course. Not by much, a degree or 2, but enough to be deliberate, enough to be unmistakable as anything other than a course change. "Engine output," Oreth said. "None, sir. 0 engine signature. The ship is dark." Pressa's voice was flat with the effort of staying calm. "There is no detectable propulsion, but it's changing course." Oreth looked at the trajectory plot. The new course, extended forward, pointed toward the deeper interior of the Null Corridor. Whatever was inside it, whatever was back behind the welded door and the scratched warning and the 312-day log entry and the missing crew of 340. "Engine's warm," he said. "We stay with it." "Sir," a different officer at a different station, "I'm running the new deep scan. The life sign reading is—" The officer stopped. "Finish that sentence," Oreth said. The officer finished it. "The life sign reading is no longer marginal, sir. It's A pause that lasted too long. The computer can't give account. It's returning an error. Orath looked at the sensor screen. The officer pulled up the error message on the main display, big enough for everyone to read. Quantity exceeds scan parameters. The bridge was very quiet. Orath looked at the Carthage on the forward screen, battered, dark, enormous, moving without moving, and he thought about the scratched words on the welded door, and he thought about the chief engineer who had argued with Jenkins about which doors you opened, and he thought about 39 years of silence from a ship that Earth claimed did not exist. He thought, there are 340 names on that manifest. He thought, the scan error doesn't have a ceiling. He said, get me a secure line to Earth, not the Council channel, the other one. Every sector admiral had an emergency back channel to Earth's military command, separate from diplomatic communications, used when the diplomatic situation had outrun its usefulness. Tell them I don't want a press release. I want an answer. Pressa sent the request. Then she said very quietly so that only he could hear, Sir, what do you think is in that ship? Orath watched the Carthage drift. I think, he said, that the question isn't what's in the ship. He watched it turn slowly, as if it knew exactly where it was going. I think the question is what the ship found. Nobody said anything after that. They just watched it move, silent and vast and wrong, through the dark that the compact had spent 800 years making sure no one entered. The Carthage did not seem to know about that rule, or did not care. The ship drifted deeper, and the sensor error sat on the screen like an open question, and Sector Admiral Orath of the Veth Compact looked at it and felt, for the first time in 41 years of service, that he was looking at something the protocol had not prepared him for. The compact had rules for everything. It did not have a rule for this. The Carthage moved the way a sleeping thing breathes, slow, steady, like it was not really trying. That was what bothered Orath the most. A ship that was dead by every sensor reading, no engine output, no power signatures, no detectable propulsion of any kind, should not be able to move with that kind of patience. Desperation moved fast. Drift moved random. What the Carthage was doing was neither. It had a heading. It maintained that heading. It adjusted when the local gravity gradient required adjustment. It was navigating. Something on that ship was navigating. Orath's patrol vessel, the Unbroken Current, matched its pace and followed at 4 kilometers distance, close enough to watch, far enough that if something went wrong, there was time to react. What kind of wrong he was preparing for, he could not have said precisely. His threat assessment training had given him categories. This situation did not fit any of them. The back-channel response from Earth's military command arrived 14 hours after Pressa sent the request. 14 hours was a long time. Earth was close enough for a same-hour response. The delay meant someone had been making decisions. The response was longer than the official one, a full page of text, and it said a great deal while communicating very little. Yes, Earth was aware of the situation. Yes, Earth was reviewing its historical records. Yes, Earth wanted to cooperate with the Compact's investigation. A full diplomatic team was being assembled. Then, at the very end, one sentence that sat differently from the rest, like a stone in soft ground. We ask that the Compact take no action against the vessel pending the outcome of the review. Orath read that sentence 4 times. Take no action, not please don't shoot it, not we believe the ship may be dangerous. Take no action, as if the instruction were obvious, as if Earth expected the Compact to simply follow it. He put the message down and did not reply. He went to the bridge and watched the Carthage move. Any change in the life sign reading, he said. No change, sir, Pressa said. The computer is still returning the error. We've rebooted the sensor array twice. The error persists. What does the error mean technically? Pressa was quiet for a moment. The scan parameters for biological life sign quantity go up to 5,000 individual signatures, sir. Above that threshold, the system is designed to return a count, not an error. The error means, she chose her words carefully, it means the system attempted to count and could not complete the process. So more than 5,000. Possibly, or a different kind of signature that the system is misreading as quantity. We don't know. A ship with a crew of 340. Carrying something the sensors counted as more than 5,000. Oreth thought about that and kept it to himself. The junior weapons officer's name was Kale. He was 22 years old, second posting, and had never been in a situation that the training manuals called unresolved contact scenario, which was what the situation officially was, because no one in the compact's command structure had yet decided what to call it in a way that implied they knew what to do about it. Kale had been on shift for 9 hours. He had watched the Carthage for 9 hours. He had watched it not respond to hails, not change its behavior, not give any sign that it was aware of their presence. He had watched the sensor error sit on the secondary screen. He had watched his commanding officer stand at the front of the bridge and say very little. He was 22 years old, and he had the particular problem of 22-year-olds everywhere, which was that he mistook the feeling of something needing to be done for the feeling of him needing to do it. The Carthage shuddered. Not visibly, the sensors picked it up, a vibration through the hull, deep, like something large shifting weight inside. Kale watched his sensor reading spike and then settle, and the spike was enough. His hand was on the firing control before his brain had fully processed the decision. He fired a single warning shot, protocol grade, sublethal dispersal round, meant to illuminate a target for further scanning and deliver a clear message that they were being tracked. Oreth heard the firing report and turned from the viewport with an expression that, on a human face, would have been described as fury. On a Veth face it was quieter than that, more dangerous. The round struck the Carthage amidships, on the hull plate between the second and third deck access points, starboard side. At this range, at this yield, hitting an unshielded vessel that old should have cracked the plate, should have vented the section, should have at minimum left a visible wound in the hull. The Carthage absorbed it. The plating dented, slightly. The round's energy scattered across the hull surface as if distributed not by armor systems, which were offline, but by the hull itself, as if the material had learned something in 39 years. The dent was the size of a large storage crate. On a ship that size in that position, it looked like a bruise on something enormous. The Carthage kept moving, same heading, same pace, no course change, no acceleration, no response. Then Kale's console lit up. Then every console lit up. Oreth was at Press's station before the alarm finished sounding. What is that? Weapon signature, sir. Her voice was flat, controlled, barely. The Carthage. It's one of its railgun arrays. It was showing as offline, sir. It was showing completely offline. The power readings were. It fired, Oreth said. It wasn't a question. The unbroken current shook. Not hard, not the way a killing blow felt, which Oreth had experienced twice in his career and which felt like the ship itself flinching. This was precise. A single impact and then the damage reports came in. Engine block 3, port side, penetrated clean. The slug had gone through the engine housing, through 2 internal supports and exited through the opposite side. Minimal structural damage. No casualties. No fire. It had not hit anything vital. It had hit exactly what it meant to hit. The Carthage had fired one shot, from a weapon array that every sensor on the unbroken current said was offline and cold, and that shot had punched through the unbroken current's engine block with the precision of a surgeon making a first incision. Not a killing blow, an answer. You shot at us, here is what we can do, we chose not to do more. Oreth understood the language. He had been in the fleet for 41 years. He understood exactly what the Carthage had just said, and the understanding sat in his chest like cold water. "Damage control," he said. "Engine 3 is offline. Compensate, maintain heading." "Sir," Cale's voice from the weapons station, tight and young and frightened. "Sir, should I?" "You should sit down and put your hands in your lap," Oreth said, "and not touch anything else on that console until I tell you to. Can you do that?" Cale did that. The Compact Security Council convened for the second time in 20 hours, and this time the tone was different. The first meeting had been the tone of bureaucrats managing an inconvenience. This meeting was the tone of people who had just heard something break in the next room and were deciding whether to go look. "One of your crew fired without authorization," said Counselor Vreth. It was an accusation wearing a statement's clothing. "A junior weapons officer discharged a single warning round," Oreth said. "He was on the holocom again in his ready room with the door closed. He has been relieved of duty pending review." And the Carthage returned fire. The Carthage returned a single targeted non-lethal shot. It disabled one engine. It did not attempt to destroy this vessel. He paused. "It could have." "You don't know that." "I know what a railgun slug to the command section looks like, Counselor. I have seen it. That is not what happened. What happened was a demonstration." He looked at the relay screen. "The ship is 39 years old, crewed apparently by no one, running on no detectable power. It fired one shot, precision targeted, from a weapon array that our sensors said was cold. It chose to damage rather than destroy. That is a decision. Something on that ship is making decisions." The council talked. The circles turned. This time they turned faster because two things had changed. A shot had been fired, and Earth had sent a message asking for no action to be taken, and those two things together meant the political situation had teeth now. The decision: full engagement authorization. The Carthage was to be given one final opportunity to respond to hails. If no response within 2 hours, Oreth was authorized to use necessary force to disable and board the vessel. Oreth received the authorization and thought about the word disable for a long time. The 2 hours passed. The Carthage did not respond. It continued moving, same heading, same pace, and Oreth thought about the chief engineer's voice on that log recording: calm, practical, not afraid, just certain about which doors you opened and which you didn't. He ordered the full salvo. 17 shots. The unbroken current carried 4 forward battery arrays and 3 secondary, and Oreth used all of them, properly sequenced, full yield. Not warning shots, not demonstrations. 17 shots at a vessel that had one engine pod live and the rest of its systems reading as offline, at close enough range that the targeting systems had margin for error measured in centimeters. Oreth watched the sensor board. The first 3 shots hit. Hull plating gone on the port forward section, gone completely, vented to space. He watched the atmosphere vent. That section of the ship was open to vacuum. Whatever was in that section was dead. The next 4 hit, more plating. A secondary sensor array sheared off. The stub of it tumbled away slowly, end over end. The Carthage kept moving. 10 more shots. The starboard midship section took 3 of them. The unbroken current sensors showed fires starting inside, actual combustion, which meant atmosphere, which meant sections still pressurized. Good. Fires meant vulnerable systems. Fires meant damage was accumulating. The Carthage should have been dead. By every calculation that Oreth's experience and his ship's computer could produce, a vessel that size, that old, with that much hull already compromised, taking that weight of fire at that range, should have broken, should have split, at minimum should have lost the ability to navigate. It did not split, it did not stop navigating. It turned. Slowly, ponderous, the way a very large, very old, very patient thing turns when it has decided it is done being shot at. And then it fired back. Not one shot this time. The Carthage's railgun arrays came online, 4 of them, then 6, then 8, all of them reading as cold and dead on the sensors right up until the moment they fired. The shots came in sequence, measured. Each one landed in a different location on the unbroken current. Engine 2, gone. The forward sensor array, taken off at the base with a shot so precise that the cut was clean, almost surgical. The lateral maneuvering thruster bank on the port side collapsed inward. Then the aft communications array, the external cargo bay doors, the secondary power relay, the tertiary shield generator. Each shot different, each shot non-lethal, each shot stripping capability from the unbroken current the way you'd strip tools from someone's hands, methodically, calmly, leaving them standing but unable to do anything useful. Oreth held on to the edge of the command console and took the hits and watched the damage reports stack up and did not order a second salvo, because a second salvo was not going to do anything. And he knew that now in a place that had nothing to do with training or protocol and everything to do with 41 years of looking at enemies and understanding them. The Carthage was not trying to kill them. The Carthage was telling them to stop. "All weapons hold," he said. "Sir," from the new weapons officer, the one who had replaced Kale. "Hold all weapons." He looked at the Carthage on the forward screen. Half its hull plates gone, fires visible through the gaps, one engine dark and had been for 39 years, trailing atmosphere from sections that should have been sealed. Damage report. The damage report took 3 minutes because there was a great deal to report. When it was done, Oreth had a clear picture. The unbroken current was crippled, not destroyed, thoroughly crippled. They had maneuvering on one thruster bank. They had communications on emergency backup. They had weapons on 2 of 4 arrays. And the Carthage had stopped firing the moment he ordered weapons hold. He went back to his ready room. He sat down. He was 63 years old and 41 years in the fleet, and he was going to write the contact report that had to be written, and he was going to write it accurately because accuracy was the only thing he had left to offer. The vessel, HFY Carthage, demonstrated the following capabilities during this engagement. 1. Sustained and absorbed a 17-round full battery salvo from a compact patrol vessel, without mission kill. 2. Fired from weapon arrays reading as offline and cold on all standard sensors. 3. Demonstrated precision targeting, consistent with advanced fire control. 4. Chose non-lethal targeting consistently throughout engagement. 5. Ceased fire upon cessation of incoming fire. He looked at that last line. He left it in. It was accurate. On Earth, in the Parliament of Sol, the session had been running for 4 hours. The Council was processing the Compact's formal declaration, a Level 9 incursion notice, the highest category, which meant that Earth was officially accused of deliberate violation of the Null Corridor Pact, and the Compact was reserving the right to treat the violation as an act of war. There were speeches. There were denials. There were legal experts explaining what a Level 9 meant and political experts explaining what it didn't mean, and military advisors standing at the edge of the room looking at their consoles and not saying anything. In the third row of the observers' gallery, a very old general named Commander Yale Drury sat and listened. She was 81 years old. She had fought in 2 border conflicts, commanded a battle group, served 20 years in Earth Fleet intelligence, and retired with a reputation that was described by those who admired her as formidable and by those who did not as inconvenient. She had been in her apartment when the news broke. She had dressed and come to Parliament without being summoned, because she had been waiting for something to require her presence for 39 years, and she did not intend to arrive late. She listened to the speeches. She listened to the name of the ship being read into the record by the session clerk, HFY Carthage, Registry 774 Alpha Meridian, reported lost 39 years prior. She listened to the compact's accusation that Earth was feigning ignorance of a vessel it had secretly deployed in forbidden space. When the clerk finished reading the registry number, Drury stood up. She was old enough that standing took a moment. The gallery was quiet in that particular way of people who recognize that a particular person standing up matters, even if they cannot say precisely why. She said 4 words. "Which ship was it?" The session chair looked at her. "Commander Drury, this is an observer's gallery, and you are not." "Which ship?" she said. "I heard the name. I want to hear the registry number read again." The clerk read it again. Drury sat down. She did not speak again for the rest of the session. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the floor, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has been proven right about something terrible and finds no satisfaction in it whatsoever. A junior aide found her in the corridor afterward. The aide was young, ambitious, and had heard enough about Drury to know that her silence during a session meant more than most people's speeches. "Commander," the aide said carefully, "is there something you know about the Carthage?" Drury looked at her for a moment. "I filed the loss report," she said, 39 years ago. I was 26 and I had just been assigned to Fleet Intelligence and the Carthage was my first case." She started walking. The aide walked with her. The ship vanished without a distress signal, without wreckage, without an emergency beacon. Vanished the way things only vanish when they go somewhere that closes behind them. "Into the corridor," the aide said. "Into the corridor." Drury pushed through a door into a quieter hallway. "I spent 3 years on that case. I pulled every sensor log from the region, interviewed everyone who had contact with the ship in the final weeks before it disappeared. I tried to get authorization for a probe insertion into the corridor interior." She paused. "I was told by people much more senior than me that the corridor was a closed matter, that the compact protocols were in place for good reason and were not to be tested. That I should close the file and move on." "And you did." "I closed the file," Drury said. "I didn't move on, there's a difference." She stopped at the end of the corridor at a window that looked out over the city. 338 people on that crew. I had all their names memorized. I don't anymore, I'm 81, I don't memorize like I used to, but for a long time I did. She looked out the window. The crew complement was 340 when the ship launched. 2 were evacuated before departure for medical reasons. 338 people went into that corridor, and the ship never came back. The aide was quiet. "The compact says we sent that ship deliberately," Drury said. "We didn't. I know we didn't because if we had I would have known. That was my job." She turned from the window. "Which means the ship found its own way back, after 39 years. She started walking again. "Which means something happened in there, something we don't have a category for." "What do we do?" the aide said. Drury didn't answer immediately. She walked to the end of the corridor and through another door and didn't look back. Then, without stopping, without turning around, she said, "We find out which of the 338 survived, and then we ask them." Orath's deep scan probe reached its closest approach to the Carthage at 300 station time. The Carthage did not react to it. The probe transmitted for 6 minutes before its signal degraded past the point of usefulness. The interference inside the corridor was getting stronger the deeper the Carthage moved. In 6 minutes it sent back enough. Orath reviewed the data alone, with the door of his ready room locked, and when he was done reviewing it, he sat very still for a long time. Life signs, many of them. The error was still there, quantity exceeds scan parameters, but the probe's sensors were different from the patrol vessel's sensors, more precise in some ways, and they had captured something the ship's arrays had not. Shapes, human shapes, moving through the interior of the Carthage with purpose, with pattern, with the organized movement of a crew that knew their ship and their duties. Many, many human shapes. More than 338. More than 500. More possibly than 1,000. The probe's count had failed at the same threshold as the ship's sensors. but the images showed corridors that were populated, spaces that were occupied, a ship that was full of life in a way that was simply not possible for a vessel that size with a crew complement of 338, even if every single one of them had survived. Orath thought about 39 years. He thought about a sealed door and a scratched warning and a chief engineer who knew which doors you didn't open. He thought they didn't just survive in there. He thought they lived. He sent one final transmission to Earth, to the back channel, to the military line, to whoever was on the other end of it making decisions they weren't telling him about. I need to understand what you know, not what you're willing to say, what you know. Because whatever is on that ship, it is not what either of us prepared for, and if the Council gives me a second engagement authorization, I am going to need a reason not to use it. He sent it and waited. The Carthage moved on ahead of him, deeper into the dark, patient as a tide, carrying whatever it carried. The stars did not answer, they rarely did. But somewhere ahead, in the place where the sensors returned errors and the doors stayed sealed, and the walls kept warnings scratched into them in bright metal, something was waiting. Orath was beginning to suspect it had been waiting for a very long time. Longer, possibly, than either of them. The fishing station sat 12 kilometers off the coast of what used to be Portugal, and it smelled like salt and old rope, and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to people who have chosen to be far from things on purpose. Bram Os had lived there for 11 years. Before that, a small house in Lisbon. Before that, a smaller apartment in Geneva. Before that, a posting he did not talk about, in a building that did not officially exist, doing work that was not on any public record. He was 71 years old, and he had the body of a man who had spent a decade hauling nets, and the eyes of a man who had spent much longer than that watching for something that had not arrived yet. The morning the shuttle came for him, he was on the upper deck with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over the water. He did not seem surprised by the shuttle. He watched it land on the station's small pad, watched two people in civilian clothes get out and walk toward him, and he drank the last of his coffee before they reached him. "Mr. Osai," said the first one. She was young, government posture, civilian clothes. "My name is Director Sola. I'm with the Quiet Office." "I know what the Quiet Office is," Bram said. "I worked there for 17 years. He set his cup down on the railing. "Come inside, I'll make more coffee." The Quiet Office was what it sounded like. It was the part of Earth's intelligence structure that handled things that made noise in the wrong places, things that, if they became loud, would cause more problems than they solved. It had no official name on any government document. It had a director and a staff of 41 and a budget that appeared in the defense appropriations as a maintenance line for a weather satellite that did not exist. Director Sola was 43 years old and had run the office for 6 years, and in 6 years had handled 11 situations that she would describe, in unguarded moments, as difficult. She had never handled anything like this. She sat at Bram Osai's kitchen table and drank his coffee, which was very good, and watched him move around the small kitchen with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in his space, and she thought about how to begin. He began for her. "It's the Carthage," he said. He was at the counter with his back to her, pouring a second cup. "That's why you're here. It came back." Director Sola set her cup down. "How did you know?" "Because nothing else would bring you to my door." He turned around and sat down across from her. "I've been watching the news feed since yesterday. I saw the Compact's incursion notice. I saw Parliament's session this morning." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "I know the registry number. I've known it for 39 years. You were the signals officer on duty the night the Carthage disappeared." "I was the signals officer who received the last transmission from the Carthage," Bram said. "That's not exactly the same thing. The ship didn't disappear that night. It had already gone into the corridor. The transmission came from inside." Director Sola was very still. "That's not in the file." "No," Bram said, "it's not." He stood up and went to a cabinet above the refrigeration unit and took down a box, metal, sealed, the kind of thing that had been built to survive a long time. He set it on the table between them. He looked at it for a moment before he opened it. Inside, a single data chip, old format, and a handwritten note on a piece of paper. He had written the note himself, in his own handwriting, the night after the transmission came in, because he had known even then that there were things that should exist in a form that could not be deleted from a server. 3 days before the official loss report, Bram said. 3 days before Fleet Intelligence, before Commander Drury filed the Carthage as missing, I received a transmission. It came in on frequency Delta 7 Whiskey 9. He looked at Director Sola. That frequency didn't officially exist. It was used exclusively by black program vessels, ships operating under deep cover authorization that went above my clearance level. I wasn't supposed to be able to receive on it. I wasn't supposed to know it existed. But you did. I'd been in signals for 8 years. You learned things. He pushed the data chip across the table. 7 seconds of audio, one voice. I've listened to it several thousand times over the past 39 years. I know every breath, every syllable. What does it say? Bram looked at the window. Outside, the water was very calm. We found it. It's not empty. Do not send anyone else. He looked back at her. That's all. No coordinates, no identification. A woman's voice, young, clear, no distortion. Then the channel closed and there was nothing else, and 3 days later the Carthage was officially missing. Director Sola looked at the data chip. You didn't report it. I reported it, Bram said. I filed it on the correct forms in the correct channels to the correct supervisor, who told me that the transmission was almost certainly a ghost signal, interference artifact from the corridor's edge, which did sometimes produce false audio readings. I was told to log it as a sensor anomaly and close the file. And I logged it as a sensor anomaly and closed the file. And then I went home and wrote that note and put the chip in this box and kept it for 39 years. He looked at it. Because ghost signals don't breathe. The quiet office's operations room was underground, which was where operations rooms tended to be when they belonged to agencies that didn't officially exist. Director Sola's team assembled the full picture over the following 6 hours, and Bram Ose sat in a chair in the corner and drank more coffee and was not asked to leave. The picture looked like this. The Carthage had launched 39 years ago on what was officially a deep range survey mission, standard classification, routine assignment, the kind of mission that filled 2 paragraphs in Fleet's annual report. Its designated route passed within 40 light minutes of the null corridor's outer boundary. Fleet protocol required it to maintain minimum distance and log the boundary's position but not approach it. This was the official record. The unofficial record, which the quiet office had been assembling in pieces for 3 decades, from fragments and anomalies and things that almost didn't exist, told a different story. The Carthage had not been on a standard survey mission. It had been tasked, through a channel that bypassed Fleet Command and ran directly through a committee that had officially ceased to exist 15 years prior, with a specific objective: approach the null corridor's interior boundary and deploy a passive sensor array. No entry, no engagement, just look. Someone had wanted to know what was in there. Who authorized it? Director Sola said. Her deputy, a careful man named Wren who had been with the office for 12 years, looked at the document chain. The authorization runs through the committee. The committee was formally dissolved, which means the records are complicated. Complicated. Sealed, reclassified, and assigned to an archive that requires a level of clearance that I don't have, and you technically do, but only on paper. He paused. 3 of the 7 committee members are still alive. The other 4 died before the Compact's incursion notice, which is either fortunate timing or not. Director Sola thought about that. Get me the names of the 3 living ones. Don't contact them yet. She turned to the main screen. The quiet office had access to the compact's public channel communications, not the secure lines, but the broadcast frequencies, the news channels, the official statements. She had been watching the Carthage's behavior in the sensor data that Oreth had formally filed with the Compact Council, which was public record because the Compact was building its legal case, and legal cases required documentation. 17 shots. The Carthage had taken 17 shots at full battery yield and was still moving. "Run me the hull composition analysis," she said, "from the sensor data in the filing." Wren ran it. He looked at the results and then looked at them again. "This isn't right," he said. "What isn't?" "The hull composition, the alloy signature." He pulled it up on the main screen. The Carthage was built with a standard fleet-grade titanium composite hull. That's what the original specs show. What the Compact's sensors are reading on the hull now, he highlighted the relevant data, doesn't match that composition. Director Sola looked at the numbers. She was not an engineer, but she had been in intelligence long enough to know that when a material changed its properties without being replaced, it meant something had changed it. "It's denser," she said. "Significantly, and the distribution is it's not consistent with any alloy we build. It's as if the hull has been reinforced at a molecular level, not welded, not plated. The composition of the original material itself has changed." He paused. "Over time, which suggests—" "Something inside the corridor," Director Sola said. "Something interacted with the hull over 39 years and changed what it's made of." Wren did not say anything. The implication was large enough to stand on its own. Bram Osai from his chair in the corner said, "The probe." Director Sola looked at him. "What?" "You have a probe capability," he said. "Deep range insertion. I know you do. I helped design the protocol when I was still with the office. Low signature drone, passive sensors only, 30-minute window before signal decay." He looked at her steadily. "Send one, before you do anything else. Before you decide anything, or authorize anything, or talk to anyone, send a probe into the corridor interior and see what's there." She looked at Wren. Wren had the expression of someone running rapid calculations. "We have 3 probes," he said. "On standby, second shelf, could be launched within 4 hours." Director Sola thought for a moment. The correct action by every official rule was to brief Parliament, notify the fleet, coordinate with the Compact. There was a process. The process existed for a reason. The process had also, 39 years ago, classified a 7-second transmission as a sensor anomaly. "Launch the probe," she said. "Passive sensors only. No transmissions from the probe, we receive only. If the Compact detects it, they'll see a piece of debris. Keep the profile below their detection threshold." She stood up. 4 hours. I want the data the moment it comes in." Wren went to launch the probe. Bram Os sat in his chair and said nothing, and Director Sola looked at him and said, "Is there anything else you haven't told me?" He was quiet for a moment. "My daughter shipped on the Carthage," he said. The room was very still. "She was 24, he said. "It was her 3rd posting. She was a signals officer. She followed me into the work, which I was proud of and also spent considerable time feeling guilty about." He looked at his hands. "Her name is Kemi Os." He paused. "She was the one who always said you had to go toward the things that scared you, or the things that scared you just got bigger." Director Sola sat down. She had prepared for this meeting with everything the quiet office had on Bram Osai, and the file mentioned a daughter lost on the Carthage, and she had thought she had accounted for that fact. She found, sitting across from him, that she had not accounted for it at all. "I'm sorry," she said. "Might be alive," Bram said simply. "The Carthage is. The crew might be." He said it the way people say things they have been saying to themselves for 39 years, so often that the words have worn smooth. "That's why I kept the chip. That's why I stayed close to the signals network even after I retired. That's why I went to a fishing station 12 kilometers off the coast rather than somewhere without a satellite uplink." He looked at the window. You stay within range of the signal, just in case. The probe launched at 600 and entered the null corridor's interior boundary at 8:47 and transmitted for 11 minutes before its signal degraded past recovery. The data came in through a receiver array that the quiet office maintained on a private satellite, and it came in all at once, compressed, and Wren decoded it and put it on the main screen, and the room went silent. Images, structures, vast and geometric and old in a way that registered not as a number but as a feeling, the feeling of standing at the edge of something so deep that the bottom was a concept rather than a place. They were not ruins exactly. Ruins implied they had stopped being used. These structures had lines that were too clean, geometry that was too intentional, a quality of presence that said, "We are still here. We have always been here." Not compact architecture, not human, not any species on any record in any archive the quiet office had access to, and the quiet office had access to a great deal. Something had built those structures before the compact existed, before humans had left their solar system, before the compact's founding species had achieved spaceflight. These things had been standing in the dark of the null corridor when everything that called itself civilization was still working out agriculture. And moving among them, in the second-to-last image the probe transmitted before the signal died, small against the enormous geometry of the structures, but unmistakable in shape, unmistakable in the way they moved, human figures. Not one or two, many, moving with the purpose of people who knew exactly where they were going. The last image was different. The probe had turned at the end of its transmission window as if something had caused it to reorient. The final image was a close capture, close enough to see detail. A face, a human face looking directly at the probe. A woman, older, with the particular expression of someone who has seen many things and is no longer surprised by most of them. Looking at the probe, looking at whoever would receive this image. Bram Osai stood up from his chair. He moved to the screen slowly, and he stood in front of it and looked at the face for a long time. "That's her," he said. His voice was steady. It was the steadiness of a person who has been right about something for 39 years and has had a long time to prepare for the moment of being proven correct. "That's Kemi," he said. Director Sola looked at the image. The woman in it was older than the file photo she had, older by decades. But the file photo was 39 years old, and the woman in this image was alive, and the structure visible behind her shoulder was ancient beyond measuring, and she was looking directly at the probe with an expression that said, "I know you're watching. I know you received this. Come and get me." Not distressed, not desperate, certain. "She knows we sent a probe," Wren said. "She's been in there for 39 years, Bram said. "She probably knows a great many things." He turned from the screen. "I want to go." Director Sola looked at him. "Mr. Osa." "Send me to the Carthage," he said. "One ship, no weapons, one person aboard." He was 71 years old, and he stood like a man who had made this particular decision a long time ago and was simply waiting for the moment to act on it. "She said don't send anyone else. She didn't say don't come yourself." He looked at Director Sola steadily. "She's my daughter, send me." Director Sola thought about the process, the briefings, the committees, the coordinated approach. She thought about a 7-second transmission that had been filed as a sensor anomaly. "Wren," she said, "get a courier ship ready. Single occupant, no weapons, full communications array." She looked at Bram. "You leave in 2 hours." The courier ship was small and fast and had enough fuel for a long burn and a return trip if the return trip was needed. Bram Os sat in the pilot's seat and looked at the navigation display and did not sleep during the transit, which took 18 hours. He thought about Kemi at 24, her laugh, which was too loud for indoor spaces and entirely correct for everything else. Her habit of eating standing up because she said sitting down to eat was something you did when you had time, and she was always convinced she didn't have time. The way she had looked at him when he drove her to the port for her first posting, a look that was equal parts excitement and goodbye, and he had wanted to say something useful and had instead said, "Stay warm." He had thought about those words for 39 years, "Stay warm," as if she were going on a camping trip. The Carthage appeared on his sensors 8 hours out from the corridor's inner boundary. It was moving still, same heading, same pace. He matched its course and opened a channel on every frequency the ship possessed. Static. He sat with the static for 4 hours, watching the ship grow on his forward screen. The hull damage from the compact's engagement visible now, sections open to space, plating gone in long strips. It should not have been moving. It was moving. He said on the open channel, "Carthage, this is Bram Osai. I'm alone. I'm unarmed. I'm coming alongside." He paused. "I got your message, the probe image." He paused again. "I've been at the signal station for 11 years, just in case. I want you to know that." Static. Then, through the static, a voice. Young. Clear. Slightly distorted by 39 years of equipment that had been maintained with whatever was available inside the corridor. "Dad." Bram Osai put both hands flat on the console in front of him. He did not move them. He looked at the screen, the Carthage on it, vast and battered and alive, and the static that was also a voice, and the null corridor ahead, and the ancient structures that the probe had captured, and whatever was in there that had changed the hull's molecular composition and filled a ship with more people than it was built to hold. He sat with his hands on the console, and the static resolving slowly into something that sounded like breathing, alive, steady, present, and he thought, 11 years on a fishing dock, 39 years waiting for a signal. "I'm here," he said. "I'm coming." The Carthage adjusted course slightly, an invitation. Or a door opening. He followed it in. The docking collar connected with a sound that was entirely normal. A clunk, a hiss, a pressure equalization, the ordinary language of two ships meeting. Bram Os sat in the pilot's seat and listened to it and thought that ordinary was not the word he would have chosen for any part of the last 18 hours, but the docking collar didn't know that. He unsealed his helmet. The air that came through from the Carthage was warm. Not recycled ship warm, not the metallic, processed quality that every vessel's life support produced, the air that tasted faintly of the filters it had passed through. This was different. It had weight to it. It smelled like soil, which made no sense, and something else he couldn't name, something old and dry and clean, the way stone smelled in a place that had never been rained on. He unstrapped from the pilot's seat and went to the docking collar and opened the hatch. The corridor on the other side was lit. Warm light, not the blue-white of standard ship lighting. Someone had changed the lighting. The corridor walls were the original metal of the Carthage's construction, but they had been worked on was the only phrase Bram could find. Not painted. Something had been done to the surface that made it look less like a ship's interior and more like a place where people lived. Small marks at regular intervals. Patterns. Not decorative exactly. More like the way a path gets worn into a floor by the same footsteps over many years. At the end of the corridor, a woman was waiting. Bram Osai walked toward her and she walked toward him, and they met in the middle of the corridor, and he put his arms around her and held on, and she held back, and neither of them said anything for a long time. She was taller than he remembered, or he was shorter than he used to be, probably both. She was 63 years old, and she looked like a woman in her early 40s who had spent a great deal of time doing physical work. Her hair was entirely gray. Her hands, when she stepped back and he held them and looked at them, were the hands of someone who had built things and fixed things and carried things for decades. Her eyes were the same, exactly the same. That was the thing that undid him briefly, which he managed to get through by looking at the corridor wall and breathing carefully. "You look old," she said. Her voice was her voice. 39 years had deepened it slightly. "You don't," he said. "I'll explain that." She kept one of his hands and turned and he walked with her. "There's a lot to explain. I've been working out how to do it since the probe came through." She glanced at him. "The probe was yours." The quiet office. I figured no one else would have used that frequency. She guided him around a corner and into a wider corridor, and he stopped walking. The corridor was full of people. Not crowded, they were going about things, moving with purpose, carrying materials, talking in small groups. But full. Bram counted automatically, the old signals habit, and stopped counting at 40 because there were more than 40 in this corridor alone, and the corridor extended in both directions, and through the open hatches at its ends he could see more. Children, that was the thing that landed hardest. Among the adults, the people who had clearly been on the Carthage 39 years ago, who had Kemi's quality of settled certainty, there were children, teenagers, young people who had never set foot on Earth, who had been born here in the belly of this ship in the dark of the null corridor. A boy of perhaps 14 looked at Bram with frank curiosity, not suspicion, not fear, just curiosity, the way you looked at something new that you hadn't decided what to make of yet. How many? Bram said. On the ship, about 900. Kemi started walking again. We lost 11 people in the first 3 years, accidents mostly, illness. After that, a small pause, we stopped losing people. He looked at her, stopped. I told you I'd explain. She took him to a room that had been the Carthage's secondary briefing room and was now something else, a meeting space, but lived in, with chairs that had been modified and a table that had been built from materials that were not entirely ship standard. On the table was food, actual food, not rations, things that had been grown. Bram sat down and Kemi sat across from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the table. Where do you want me to start? She said. The transmission, he said. 3 days before the official loss report, your voice, 7 seconds. She nodded. We'd been inside the boundary for 4 days. We weren't supposed to go inside, the mission parameters said passive scanning from the outer edge. But the passive array wasn't picking up anything useful, and Captain Murren, she stopped, and something passed through her face. Captain Murren made a decision. We went in. And found the structures. Yes, but not right away. First we found nothing, just space, dark. The corridor messes with sensors, you know that, but it also messes with your sense of distance. We thought we traveled 30 light minutes inside the boundary. We'd actually traveled 6 hours. When we figured that out, we tried to turn around. She looked at the table. The ship turned, but the boundary didn't get closer. We moved toward it for 4 days and the distance stayed the same. The keeper, Bram said. Kemi looked at him. You know about it. The probe image showed the structures. We made inferences. He looked at his hands. That transmission, that was you. Captain Murren authorized me to send it. We'd found the structures by then on day 7. We'd also figured out that we couldn't leave. She met his eyes. I sent it on Delta 7 Whiskey 9 because I knew you'd receive it. I knew you'd know it wasn't an artifact. She paused. I also knew that if I identified myself, you'd spend the next 39 years trying to get in here, and that there was a reasonable chance that whatever had trapped us would also trap you. Don't send anyone else, Bram said. Yes. But you sent the probe image. Because things are different now, she leaned forward. Because it's been 39 years and we've changed the situation and the compact just shot at us, which changes things further, and there is a message that needs to go out and I needed someone on the outside I could trust to deliver it. She looked at him steadily. I needed you. Bram thought about 11 years on a fishing station, 12 kilometers off the coast, within satellite uplink range. Tell me about the keeper, he said. She talked for 2 hours, he listened. In the first year, the Carthage had tried everything. Every maneuver, every navigation approach, every technical solution a crew of 338 could devise with the equipment aboard a fleet warship. The boundary did not move. The ship did not find a way through it. Not because anything was physically blocking them. There was nothing to detect, no barrier, no field, no object. The geometry of the space simply did not cooperate. You moved toward the boundary, and the boundary stayed the same distance away. Captain Murren had held them together in the first year. She was 62 when they went in and 63 when she died. A heart condition that had been manageable with medication for a decade, and the medication ran out in month 11. They buried her in the structures because there was nowhere else, and the structures, this was the first strange thing, accepted her. Kemi had become the de facto leader of the crew. Not because of rank, she was 25 and junior to 30 people aboard, but because she was the one who started talking to it. Talking to it, Bram said. Not with language, it doesn't have language, it doesn't have anything we have categories for. She leaned back. But it responds to pressure and to persistence and to the absence of fear, which we worked very hard on. The fear went away eventually, not because we were brave, because we got tired. When you've been somewhere long enough, fear costs too much to maintain. What she described was not communication exactly. It was more like negotiation without words, a process of the crew doing things and the keeper responding to those things, and the crew adjusting and doing other things and the keeper adjusting in turn, over months, then years. A dialogue of behavior. The keeper had not been hostile. That was the thing that took them the longest to understand. It had not been trying to trap them, it had been trying to reject them, the way a body rejected something foreign, not out of malice, out of reflex. And the crew of the Carthage had responded to rejection the way humans responded to most things, by refusing to leave. We just stayed, Kemi said. We made ourselves comfortable. We fixed the ship, we grew food in the hydroponics bays we built in the cargo sections. We had children, the first children were born in year 3. We made a life. She looked around the room. And eventually the keeper stopped trying to push us out, and then it started looking at us. Looking. That's the only word I have for it. It paid attention. The way you pay attention to something that surprises you, a small smile. We surprised it. We were the first thing that had ever surprised it, I think. Every other species that came in here it rejected and they left, and that was the end of the story. We didn't leave. That had never happened before. How do you know that? Because it told us, she paused, eventually in its way. The hull composition. Bram thought about Wren's sensor analysis, the molecular change in the Carthage's plating, the density that shouldn't have been possible. It changed the ship, he said. It changed everything it touched, including us. She said it simply, without drama. That's why I don't look 63. That's why we stopped losing people after year 3. It doesn't make you immortal. We've had deaths, accidents, a few in the engagement with the compact vessel, but illness stopped. The kind of slow cellular degradation that makes people old the way it makes people old on Earth. She shook her head. Not here, not anymore. Bram looked at his daughter, 63 years old and looking 40, and thought about 11 years on a fishing dock. I missed a lot, he said. You did, she said it gently, not as an accusation, but you're here now. The message was in a data chip that Kemi had been building for 6 years. She placed it on the table between them and looked at it the way you looked at something you'd spent a long time preparing and weren't entirely sure was ready. Everything we learned, she said, 39 years of contact with the keeper, what it is, what it wants, what it offered us and what we offered back. She pushed the data chip toward him, and something else, something about the compact. Bram picked up the chip. It was heavier than it should have been, or it seemed heavier. He couldn't tell if that was the chip or the weight of what was in it. Tell me the something else, he said. Kemi folded her hands on the table. The keeper is old, she said. Older than any civilization that currently exists. It's been in this corridor since before the compact's founding species achieved spaceflight, before human beings had writing. She paused. It has encountered other species, many others over a very long time. The compact's founding species. Yes, 800 years ago. They came in the same way we did, exploring, pushing boundaries, found the structures. The keeper tried to reject them. She looked at the table. They didn't do what we did. They didn't stay. They ran. And they ran fast and they went home and they classified what they'd found and they built the Null Corridor Pact, the law that made this entire region of space forbidden. Bram was quiet. Not to protect others from the Keeper, Kemi said. To protect themselves from anyone else finding it first. They ran from something ancient and vast and utterly beyond their framework, and they built a fence around it, and they wrote laws saying no one could enter, and they founded the Compact and put themselves at the head of it, and the Compact's power has rested on that fence for 800 years. And if someone found out that the founding species ran, that the Keeper is not a weapon or a threat but something they were simply too afraid to face, the founding species loses the authority that the Pact gives them. The Compact's entire legal structure changes. She met his eyes. That's in the chip, all of it. The Keeper's memory, its record of the first contact 800 years ago. It's not language, but we learned to translate it. It took a long time. The translation is in there. Who gets the chip? Bram said. Not the generals, Kemi said. Not the diplomats. Not the people who make decisions by committee in rooms without windows. She looked at him. Give it to whoever is still curious enough to ask the right questions. You'll know them when you meet them. She said it the way she used to say things when she was 24, certain, a little impatient with the people who hadn't figured it out yet. He almost laughed. The Compact battle group arrived 16 hours later. 40 ships. Orath was not with them. The unbroken current was still undergoing emergency repair. But his contact report had been the foundation of the deployment order, and the deployment order was clear. Bring the Carthage to heel, impound the human courier vessel, and restore Compact authority over the null corridor boundary. 40 ships. Clean lines, efficient design, the elegant precision of 800 years of organized civilization. They arranged themselves in a containment formation around the Carthage and Bram Osai's courier ship and broadcast on all frequencies, simultaneously, in 7 languages including Standard Earth. The message was very long and said essentially one thing: stand down. The Carthage turned to face them. It was one ship, old and battered, and half its hull open to space and trailing atmosphere in thin streams that caught the light and looked, Bram thought, like banners. It turned to face 40 ships the way you turned to face something you had decided about well in advance. No hesitation, no adjustment, just the action of a thing that had already made its calculation. Bram was on the Carthage's bridge. Kemi was at the communications console. Around them, people moved with the practiced quiet of a crew that had been working together for a very long time. Kemi opened the battle group's channel. She looked at Bram once, not asking permission, just acknowledging, and then she looked at the screen, at the 40 ships arranged in their precise formation, and she said, "We have been polite." Her voice was calm, not threatening, not afraid, the voice of someone stating a fact. That was patience. Don't mistake it for weakness. She closed the channel. She turned to the crew. "Battle stations," she said. Around Bram Osai, the Carthage, his daughter's ship, his daughter's home, the ship that had gone into the dark 39 years ago and come back changed, came alive. Not with the emergency lighting and alarm sounds of a vessel going to combat readiness. Something else, something quieter. The hull sang. That was the only word Bram had for it. A subsonic vibration that he felt in his back teeth and his sternum and the soles of his feet. A resonance that the Carthage's metal produced as something passed through it. Something from the corridor, from the structures, from the vast and patient thing that had spent 39 years getting to know them. On the sensor screen, the 40 compact ships sat in perfect formation. The Carthage was one old warship with half its plating gone, running on 2 engine pods, carrying 900 people who had never planned to be here, and had built a life from the fact that they were. Kemi looked at the battle group. She looked at it the way you looked at something you had already decided was smaller than it thought it was. "Let's show them," she said, "what 39 years of good neighbors looks like." The keeper answered, and the space around the Carthage changed. The space around the Carthage did not explode or burn or crack open with light. It did not do anything that weapons did. It simply became more. That was the only way Bram Osei could describe it afterward in the debrief, to people who had not been there. The space around the ship, the same dark vacuum that space always was, the same nothing became more of itself. Deeper, present, as if the corridor had been paying attention from a distance and had now moved closer, the way a very large, very old thing moves when it has decided to stop watching and start participating. The 40 compact ships felt it. Their sensor readings said nothing was there. Their crews felt differently. On 14 ships, personnel reported the same thing independently in reports that would later be cross-referenced and confirmed. A sensation of being watched. Not threateningly. Not maliciously. The sensation of something immense becoming aware of you, the way you became aware of standing at the edge of a very deep place. On 6 ships, crew members reported a secondary sensation that was harder to describe and harder to verify. The feeling that whatever was watching them had already seen them before. Had been watching them, specifically, for a very long time. Long before they were born. Long before their species had a name. The battle group did not break formation. Their commanders were trained for this, trained to hold in the face of psychological effects, trained to identify sensory disruption and maintain discipline through it. They held. But they did not fire. Kemi watched the sensor board. The battle group's weapon systems were active. She could see the power signatures, the targeting locks acquiring and releasing and acquiring again, the behavior of ships poised to act and finding the moment to act continuously not arriving. "They're waiting," said a young man at the navigation station. He had been born on the Carthage, which meant he was 36 at most, which meant he had never seen a warship formation from outside one. He was watching the sensor screen with the concentrated attention of someone who had studied something extensively and was now seeing it in practice. "What are they waiting for?" "Permission," Kemi said. "From who?" "From themselves." She did not look away from the screen. "They were told to fire if we didn't stand down. We haven't stood down, but they're not firing. That means someone up the chain is having second thoughts." The second thoughts were Orath's. Orath was on a repair shuttle, 40 kilometers from the battle group, in a vessel with no weapons and limited sensors, because the unbroken current was in no condition to participate in an engagement, and he was not a commander who sent ships to do what he would not do himself. He watched the battle group's sensor feed on a relay screen, and he watched the Carthage, and he watched the space between them do the thing that he did not have words for, and he thought. He thought about the 17 shots the Carthage had absorbed. He thought about the railgun slugs that had taken apart the unbroken current piece by piece, without killing anyone. He thought about the life sign error, quantity exceeds scan parameters, and the probe images he had filed with the Compact Council as part of his contact report, images that showed human figures moving among structures that should not exist. He thought about the Carthage's opening message, sent on the Fleet Common Channel, the one that had gone into every ship in the battle group simultaneously. "We have been polite." That was patience. Don't mistake it for weakness. He thought about 800 years of compact law, built around a region of space that the founding species had run from. He thought about the fact that he knew, had known since he first read the founding archives as a young officer, had carried the knowledge as the particular weight of things you know that you are not supposed to know, that the Null Corridor Pact had not been written to protect anyone. It had been written to hide something. The founding species had encountered whatever was in the corridor and had come back frightened, and frightened governments did what frightened governments did. They made laws around the thing that scared them and called the laws protection. He had known this. He had filed it in the category of things that were true, but that it was not useful to say out loud. 41 years of service, 11 commendations, a career built on being the kind of officer who saw clearly and acted according to what was real rather than what was convenient. He opened a transmission channel, not to the battle group commander, to a different address, an independent relay station that fed to every major news network in the settled galaxy, a channel maintained for emergency public broadcasts, accessible to any registered compact officer in the field. He had been a registered compact officer for 41 years. He was still registered, technically, despite being in a repair shuttle with a crew of 3 and no active command. He sent the full file, HFY Sci's data chip, which the quiet office had transmitted to him 6 hours ago through Oreth's back channel, because Director Sola had decided, as Bram had advised her, to find someone curious enough to ask the right questions, and Oreth had answered his channel with the right kind of silence. The Keeper's translated memory of the first contact, 800 years ago. The founding species' original flight logs, which had been classified at the highest level, and which Oreth had had access to for 11 years as part of his sector command responsibilities, and had read once, alone, and never mentioned to anyone. He sent everything. It reached the relay station in 4 minutes. The relay station distributed it in 6. It went to 300 news networks, 47 independent academic institutions, 69 government information services, and the personal devices of approximately 9 billion individuals who subscribe to emergency broadcast alerts. The battle group's weapons went cold 11 minutes later. Not because anyone ordered it, because the battle group commander, a careful, experienced Veth officer named Fleet Admiral Sen, received the broadcast on her personal channel along with everyone else, and she read it, and she put it down, and she looked at the Carthage on her screen and she said to her bridge, "Stand down targeting, all ships." Then she said quietly to herself in her own language, a phrase that translated roughly as, "Of course they did." The founding species did not show up to vote on the war resolution. Their representatives filed a procedural absence with the council secretary, a form that required no explanation and bought 48 hours of delay, and the delay was enough. By the time the 48 hours elapsed, the broadcast had been processed and analyzed and confirmed by 7 independent research institutions, and the political ground under the founding species representatives had become the kind of ground you did not want to be standing on when it shifted. The war resolution failed in committee, not dramatically, not with speeches. It simply did not have the votes because 3 founding species block votes were absent, and without them the numbers did not work, and the session chair called it and it was over. On Earth, in a hospital room that had a window facing south, Commander Yale Drury watched it on a screen mounted to the wall above her bed. She was 81 years old, and she had been in this hospital for 6 weeks because her heart had decided it had done enough and needed to slow down, and the doctors were engaged in an ongoing negotiation with it about what exactly enough meant. She watched the vote fail. She watched the news networks begin to process the founding species' founding archives, the flight logs that showed their ships entering the corridor 800 years ago and leaving fast, without looking back. She watched the commentators struggle with the implications of 800 years of civilizational authority resting on a single act of running away. She laughed. It was not a joyful laugh, and it was not a bitter one. It was the laugh of someone who had been correct about something for a very long time, and had spent most of that time in the company of people who had told her she was wrong. A laugh that had been waiting a long time to happen, and now that it was happening it was slightly smaller than she'd imagined, because being right was never quite as satisfying as you thought it would be when you were waiting to be proven right. She turned off the screen. She looked at the window. The sky outside was the particular gray of early morning. She thought about 338 names. She still knew some of them. "Good," she said to the empty room, and meant it. Bram Osai stayed on the Carthage. This surprised no one who knew him and surprised several people who did not. Director Sola sent a formal request for his return, politely worded, officially framed. the kind of message that was really a question pretending to be an instruction. He replied with 2 sentences, "I'm not done here. Forward my mail." He was 71 years old, and he had spent 11 years on a fishing station 12 kilometers off the coast, and the fishing had been good but not good enough to make up for the 11 years before that and the 11 years before those. He had been in small spaces for a long time. The Carthage was not a small space. The corridor was the opposite of a small space. And his daughter was here, and her children were here. He had 2 grandchildren he had not known existed until yesterday, a girl of 12 named Petra and a boy of 9 named Ade, who had his daughter's eyes, and who had looked at Bram with the frank, assessing curiosity of children who had grown up with something ancient and vast as their nearest neighbor, and therefore found nothing particularly intimidating. Petra had shown him the hydroponics bays. They were enormous. The Carthage's cargo sections had been converted over decades into growing spaces that fed 900 people, lit by arrays that pulled energy from sources Bram couldn't identify, running on systems that had been built from components that were partly ship standard and partly something else, partly Keeper. She showed him the way the walls grew things, in some sections, not plants exactly, but structures that provided the same function, that pulled nutrients from the air and processed them and produced what was needed. She showed him this with the matter-of-fact tone of a child explaining something entirely ordinary, the way children explain things that had always been true in their world. "Does it talk to you?" Bram asked her about the Keeper. Petra considered the question seriously. "Not like talking," she said. "More like when you know something without thinking about it, like knowing where the door is in the dark." He thought about that for a long time. The first ships came 3 weeks after the broadcast. Not military ships. A compact research vessel, small, unarmed, bearing the markings of the Galactic Sciences Institute rather than the fleet. It approached the corridor boundary carefully, on a trajectory that communicated hesitation from 50,000 kilometers out. It broadcast on academic frequencies, identifying itself and its purpose. A preliminary survey, if permitted. No entry without invitation. Kemi opened the channel. She spoke to the research vessel's chief scientist, a Veth female named Dr. Oreth Vea, no relation to the sector admiral, who had spent 30 years studying the corridor from the outside and was visibly struggling to maintain professional composure in the presence of someone who had spent 39 years inside it. "Can you come in?" Vea said, not formally, just asked. "That's not my decision," Kemi said. She stepped back from the communications console. Around her, on the bridge, the crew of the Carthage went about their work. In the structures outside, in the dark geometry of the corridor, something paid attention. The boundary opened. Not dramatically, not with light or sound or visible change. The research vessel's instruments simply stopped showing the interference that had defined the corridor's edge for 800 years of observation. The path was clear. The space was navigable. The research vessel came in slowly, carefully, and the Carthage met it at the inner boundary and guided it. And when the research vessel's crew saw the structures for the first time on their forward screens, they went quiet in the particular way that scientists went quiet when reality had dramatically exceeded what they had prepared to find. Dr. Vea on the comm said, They're older than," and stopped and started again. "How old are they?" "Older than the question," Kemi said. "That's what we could figure out. It's not evasion, there's no calendar that goes back far enough." A pause, and the entity, the Keeper. "Present," Kemi said. "Aware of you, not threatened." A pause. "Don't run." Vea, to her credit, laughed. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days later, a second ship came. This one was human, a university vessel out of the Mars Institute, crewed by a mix of xenobiologists and cultural anthropologists who had filed their expedition request with Earth Space Sciences board 48 hours after the broadcast, and received approval in 4, which was a record. They brought instruments and recording equipment, and a quantity of enthusiasm that Bram found genuinely comforting after a great deal of politics. Then a third ship, then two more, then 7 in a week. They came from everywhere. Compact species, Earth agencies, independent researchers who had cobbled together funding from grant applications filed before the broadcast and approved after it, because the boards reviewing the applications were the same people who had watched the broadcast and decided that the correct response to 800 years of forbidden space being suddenly unforbidden was to fund everyone who wanted to go look. The Carthage was not large enough to receive all of them. The crew built a docking platform from materials they had been accumulating since year 4, materials from the structures, partly materials from the ship itself, partly materials that were neither and both, built to the keeper's passive specifications. The platform took a week and it held. Bram helped build it. He was 71 and had spent 11 years hauling nets, and his back complained. But the work was good, and the people he worked beside were his daughter's people, and they worked the way people worked when they had been doing things together for a long time, without much talking, without friction, with the easy efficiency of a community that had solved most of its coordination problems decades ago. Ade helped too, when he wasn't in lessons. He carried things and fetched things and asked questions constantly, the way 9-year-olds did, and Bram answered what he could and said, "I don't know for the rest." And Ade accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had grown up with the keeper as a neighbor, and therefore had a fairly sophisticated relationship with the concept of things that couldn't be explained yet. Oreth requested asylum on a Tuesday. He sent the request not to Earth, not to the Compact, but directly to the Carthage, on the frequency that Kemi had used for the battle group channel. He was still in the repair shuttle. The unbroken current had been towed to a Compact repair station, but Oreth had not gone with it. He had been in the shuttle for 3 weeks, holding position at the edge of the corridor, watching the ships go in. The request was 1 paragraph. It said, "I am aware that what I did by releasing the broadcast will have consequences for my standing with the Compact fleet. I am not asking for protection from those consequences. I am asking for the opportunity to see what I sent people in there to find. I am 63 years old, and I have spent 41 years enforcing a rule I knew was wrong. I would like to spend whatever time I have left being curious about the right things. If there is a place for that, I would be grateful to know." Kemi read it to Bram. He listened. "What do you think?" she said. Bram thought about Oreth's contact report, the accuracy of it, the care of it, the way the man had written, ceased fire upon cessation of incoming fire, and left it in, because it was true and because accuracy was what he had to offer. "He writes good reports," Bram said. Kemi sent back a single line, "There is always a place for curiosity. Come in." The shuttle cleared the boundary 20 minutes later and Kemi met it at the platform. And when Oreth came through the docking collar, he looked around at the Carthage's corridors, the lived-in walls, the warm light, the children running past on their way somewhere, and he stood very still for a long moment. "I spent 41 years making sure no one came in here," he said. He said it to no one in particular, just said it. "I know," Kemi said. He looked at her. "I am sorry for the shots fired at your ship." "One of those shots was yours," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. "The hull's fine," she said. "It fixed itself." She turned. "Come on, I'll show you the structures." He followed her. He did not look back. Yale Drury died on a Friday, 6 weeks after the vote failed. Quietly, in the hospital room with the south-facing window, at 3 in the morning when the sky was the darkest it got before it began to lighten. The nurse who was with her said she had been awake and watching the window for an hour before it happened. She had not seemed distressed. She had seemed, the nurse said, like someone who had finished a very long piece of work and was satisfied with how it had turned out. Her file, unsealed per her instructions upon her death, contained 338 names. All of them handwritten, 39 years old. She had written them the night she filed the loss report, and she had kept them, and at the bottom of the page, in ink slightly different from the rest, added later, much later, was a 339th name. HFY Sci, with a small mark next to it that was not a check or a cross but something that might have been a question, or might have been an answer. The Carthage did not go home. That was the last thing people expected, and the first thing HFY had always known. Home was a direction you could orient toward or away from, and the Carthage had been oriented in all directions for 39 years and had found, eventually, that orientation was less important than position. Where you were, what you were doing there, who you were doing it with. She stood at the forward viewport one morning. It was morning by the ship's internal clock, which still ran on the original Earth Standard cycle because some things you kept for their own sake, and watched the ships moving in and out of the corridor boundary. The platform was full. The structures, visible in the middle distance against the dark, had lights moving among them that were not the keeper's, but that the keeper allowed, the lights of researchers, of people with instruments and questions, and the kind of excitement that made them forget to eat. Bram came and stood beside her. He had the coffee. He had taken over coffee duty because he was very particular about coffee, and everyone else on the Carthage had given up being particular about anything that wasn't survival critical 30 years ago, and he found this. He had told HFY, both entirely reasonable and also wrong. They stood and watched. "There's a journalist on the third dock ship," Bram said, "from the New Nairobi Tribune. She wants an interview." "Everyone wants an interview." "She specifically wants to talk to you. Says she's been covering the Null Corridor story since the first breach report and she wants the human angle." He drank his coffee. Her words, the human angle. HFY looked at the structures in the distance, ancient and geometric and present in the way that things that had outlasted everything else were present. The keeper was in there, paying attention the way it always paid attention, the way it had paid attention for 800 years before the founding species came and ran, the way it had paid attention for 39 years while the Carthage's crew stayed and stayed and stayed. "Tell her to come aboard," she said. "Tell her to bring enough time. It's a long story." Bram sent the message. Then he looked at his daughter, 63 years old and looking 40 and carrying 39 years of something that no one who hadn't been here could properly describe, and thought about all the things he had wanted to say to her over the years, all the things he had rehearsed at the signal station in the quiet, while the satellite uplink waited for a signal that took 39 years to come. He had rehearsed a great many things. He said, "Stay warm." HFY looked at him. Then she smiled, which was her laugh's quieter cousin, and looked back at the window. Outside, the ships moved in and out of the corridor, curious, careful, full of people who had decided that the correct response to 800 years of a closed door was to walk through it. And the structures stood the way they had always stood, and the keeper watched the way it had always watched, and the Carthage held its position at the edge of it all. One ship, old and battered and changed by everything it had been through, not a warship anymore if it had ever really been one, something else, a place where 900 people lived and worked and raised children who had never known a smaller world, an embassy maybe, or a home. The universe had been paying attention for a long time. It had been waiting, maybe, for exactly this, for something stubborn enough and impractical enough and human enough to move into the dark and refuse to leave and eventually, over years that became decades, make the dark into a neighborhood. The Carthage sat in the space it had earned, and the keeper, in its ancient and wordless way, was glad of the company.